According to the Office of National Statistics, there were 583 murders committed in the UK between April 2023 and March 2024. And upon looking a little deeper, it's plain to see that some regions are disproportionately responsible for more murders than others. In this week's video, I'm going to uncover the top 5 regions with the highest murder rates, as well as share one brutal case with you from each region to demonstrate the barbaric actions of those involved in committing these vile and heinous acts. And with 12 regions across the UK to choose from, it makes for an interesting, if not harrowing, look at the widespread murder rates across the UK. From a brutal monster of a man who murdered his long-term girlfriend in a shocking turn of events over half a cigarette, to a man who murdered his housemate over a theft that was a fiction of his imagination. Stay tuned to find out where the UK's deadliest regions are and hear about some of the soul-destroying cases involved. And as usual, I have chosen cases that are not always highly publicised by the national media, so there is a good chance you won't have seen or heard of many, if not any, of these cases. And as always, viewer caution is advised. Hello and welcome to the Diary of Madmen and Monsters, where we talk about the mad men, women and monsters that inhabit our society, covering well-known and not so well-known cases across the UK and beyond. And if you love true crime as much as life itself, then you're in the right place and you're going to fit in well. Now, let's get ready because it's time for more true crime. The region that takes 5th place on this uninviting list today is the East Midlands, made up of the 5 counties of Derbyshire, Lincolnshire, Northamptonshire, Nottinghamshire and Leicestershire. The East Midlands is a region known for its rich history, including being the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, the Peak District National Park and famous foods such as Melton Mowbray pork pies, Stilton cheese and Lincolnshire sausages. It really does have a lot to celebrate. But its current murder rates, on the other hand, are something it would much rather forget. During the March 2023 to March 2024 period mentioned, the East Midlands was responsible for just over 10% of the 583 murders committed across England and Wales, with a total of 62 murders being carried out across the region. The cause, of course, is hard to pinpoint, but with a high level of drug-related violence, economic hardship and deprivation, as well as systemic issues such as large reductions in borough funding, all adding up to create a pressure cooker situation. It's easy to see how that can often end in anger, frustration and bloodshed. However, it's hard to understand how the above could have resulted in the first of our featured cases being carried out. On the late afternoon of September 21st, 2023, an argument erupted between Richard Basson and his girlfriend, Carrie Slater, as they sat in their bungalow together in the village of Long Clawson, near Melton Mowbray in Leicestershire. As the argument ensued, tensions heightened and the disagreement became physical, with Carrie grabbing a carving knife and Richard grabbing a pool cue, and the pair going at each other violently. Suddenly, as Carrie stepped forward towards Richard, he jabbed the pool cue towards her in one swift motion, hitting her in the middle of the forehead, with the pool cue then entering her skull and causing Carrie to slump to the floor, bleeding from her head. Immediately realising what he had done, Richard had rang 999 and told the emergency services what had happened, stating that him and his girlfriend had been in an argument over half a cigarette and that things had gotten out of hand, and that Carrie had walked onto a pool cue he had jabbed at her as she was flying at him with a carving knife. He also said that he believed the metal band from the pool cue was still stuck under her scalp. Emergency services were immediately dispatched and upon their arrival found Carrie in the bedroom of the home with a significant injury to the front of her head. As paramedics worked on Miss Slater, Richard stood outside in the garden, acting erratically and being less than cooperative with the police, who were trying to question him over the incident. He repeatedly refused to sit down and kept on asking for a lighter to light his cigarette. But after police asked him multiple times to cooperate, and with Richard refusing to do so, the police moved in and physically arrested him, with Richard then admitting that he was the one responsible for Carrie's injuries that day. Immediately, Carrie was taken to hospital, and after multiple scans were taken of her injuries, a horrifying discovery was made. Carrie's injuries hadn't been made by a pool cue being thrust into her skull, as Richard had originally tried to claim. They had actually been made by a bullet. Carrie had in fact been shot. Immediately, Carrie was placed on life support, but just 2 days after the incident, she was taken off all life support and passed from her injuries. During the police investigation, Richard had tried to maintain his original story, but with the discovery of Carrie's actual cause of death, couldn't deny what really happened, no matter how hard he tried. Although maintained relatively tight-lipped about the situation, the police uncovered what they believed truly happened on that fateful evening in September 2023, with the prosecution putting forward the following turn of events. It was found that Richard and Carrie did in fact begin to argue over half a cigarette, and that things had gotten heated. But Carrie had not in any way, shape or form attacked Richard with a knife, and he had not used a pool cue to defend himself, with the prosecution pointing out that neither a carving knife or a pool cue were found at the scene. What had actually happened was that Besson, in a fit of anger and rage as the argument ensued, had picked up one of 3 guns found on his property, pointed it towards Carrie and pulled the trigger, with the first shot causing Carrie to duck and move out of the way of the bullet, causing it to hit the wall of the property, but with the second shot hitting her square in the forehead and lodging inside of her skull, causing irreparable damage, and eventually, just 2 days later, her death. During the police investigation, it was found that neighbours who lived near the pair had heard a loud argument on the evening of the 21st of September. They said there was then a loud bang that sounded like a gunshot at about 6:10 p.m. This, of course, matches the events the prosecution team believed had happened, but also uncovers a situation that shows how truly callous Richard had been. The neighbour described hearing the gunshots ring out at 6:10 p.m. that evening, but Richard had not made the call to emergency services until 6:45 p.m, a full 35 minutes after he had shot Carrie in the head. It was found that he had used this time that could have been spent getting life-saving care to Carrie to instead try and cover his tracks by cleaning the scene and removing all traces of the gun used to murder his girlfriend from the property, with police later finding it hidden in the garden alongside the bullet casings from the shots he had fired in the property. During the investigation, 2 further guns and 68 rounds of ammunition were found at the home, and it was also found that Besson had a long history of violence and that he had previously attacked Slater, whom he had been in an on and off relationship with for several years, including punching, kicking and shoving her. A post-mortem examination confirmed that Carrie's cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the head, with the bullet that killed her being removed by a Home Office pathologist. After a trial at Leicester Crown Court, Richard was found guilty of the merciless murder of Carrie Slater, and on the 27th of March 2024, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 32 years. Our next most murderous region, and number 4 on the list today, is the South East, comprising of Berkshire, Buckinghamshire, East Sussex, Hampshire, the Isle of Wight, Kent, Oxfordshire, Surrey and West Sussex. The South East is known for its beautiful countryside and coastline, as well as its prestigious heritage and landmarks such as Windsor Castle, Canterbury Cathedral, the White Cliffs of Dover and national heritage sites such as Battle Abbey, the the location of the Battle of Hastings in 1066. It's also the third largest region in England, with a land area of 19,072 square kilometres, and of course it is the richest region in the country alongside London itself. But between March 2023 and March 2024, the South East saw 62 murders across its constituent cities. That's approximately 10.6% of the 583 murders across the UK. And so the question has to be asked, if it has so much going for it, why does it have the fourth highest murder rate of all of the regions on our list? The main contributing factor, in my opinion, has simply got to be the sheer amount of people in the region. The South East is the most populated region in the UK, with a total population of 9,379,833 people, according to an ONS survey in 2022. With this amount of people located across any area, there are going to be higher rates of violent crime. And that brings us on to our next heinous crime. On the afternoon of Tuesday, 22nd of August 2023, a barmaid hard at work in the Powell Arms in Birchington, Kent, noticed the chef of the establishment move behind her with his phone in his hand. Sensing something sinister was about to happen, the barmaid kept a watchful eye on the chef in the reflection of the coffee machine she was standing next to. As she did, she witnessed the man kneel down behind her, place his mobile phone at an angle so that it was pointing up her skirt, and then take a picture of her underwear from that position. Disgusted by the chef's actions, the barmaid contacted the landlord who, after confirming what he had done on the pub's CCTV system, approached the chef asking him to explain himself, to which the chef simply decided to play it off as a joke, suggesting that it was simply a prank between co-workers. But the landlord of the pub declared that there could be no way in which this type of behaviour would be accepted, and immediately decided to dismiss the chef there and then. And to ensure that this matter was dealt with completely, they also decided to call the police. Upon realising that the police had been called, the chef decided to leave the pub, go home and pack a backpack with clothing and a knife, and go on the run from the police, determined to avoid punishment for the crime he had just committed. The next day, on August the 23rd, 2023, Claire Knights, a local talented artist and dog lover, was enjoying the company of her dog Zeb at home, and due to the mild weather, made the decision to take Zeb to the beach for a walk and maybe even a swim that day. At approximately 2:15 that afternoon, Claire parked her car on Shewart Lane, St Nicholas at Wade, and made the walk from there with her dog Zeb to Minnis Bay in Birchington. When she arrived at the beach, Claire enjoyed the scenery, played with her dog and enjoyed a swim, taking in the beautiful surroundings, and we can imagine feeling utter joy about being in such a picturesque setting. And at approximately 4:30 p.m, Claire decided to sit at the end of a row of beach huts on the beach, collecting herself before making the journey back to the car. Sometime just after 4:30 p.m, but before 4:50 p.m, Claire made the decision to walk back along the pathway towards her car, and so she set off on the same path she had followed earlier, back towards Shewart Lane. As she did so, at approximately 4:50 p.m, having just passed the railway line on her way back to the car, she was suddenly and brutally attacked. A man seemingly coming from out of nowhere ambushed her, grabbing her slim 5'6" frame and dragging her off the path to a quiet and secluded grassy area adjacent to a dike. There, under his power, Claire could do very little to fight back against the man who towered over her in height and stature. He restrained her using his physical strength, grabbing at her wrists and pinning her to the floor by her neck as he violently and aggressively SA'd her. Next, as Claire lay there stricken with fear, the monster began to beat her, striking her again and again to her head with his fists and eventually his feet, stamping on her body and head as she lay there in absolute pain and terror, hoping that the ordeal would soon come to an end. Eventually, After what must have felt like forever, the vile brute had rendered Claire unconscious, and upon realising he had done so, he picked up her lifeless body and threw her into the thickets of reeds in the nearby dike filled with water, where, unconscious and unable to save herself, she died a harrowing death. Immediately, the attacker began to cover up his vile crime, throwing Claire's possessions into the dike alongside her and getting rid of the knife he had with him, as well as pulling out blood-stained grass, placing it into a bag and throwing the bag into the water alongside Claire's body. Satisfied he had cleaned up the area and taking Claire's dog Zeb with him, the murdering madman left the scene of the crime and made his way to a Best Buy shop he had visited earlier on in the day to buy drinks and dog treats. On his way to and from the shop, he was witnessed by a passerby on the path near to where he had murdered Claire, and he also spoke quite normally to a runner in the same area between 5 and 6 p.m. He was also captured on Ring doorbell footage chatting to a local homeowner on Dane Road as he made his way towards the shop. And after leaving the shop with the drinks and dog treats, he returned 5 minutes later to buy 2 bottles of bleach, once again leaving with Claire's dog in tow. From here, he made his way to a den he had previously built whilst in the area that he had ambushed Claire, where he stripped off his clothing and emerged from the den barefoot, topless, and wearing only shorts. At 8:30 p.m. that evening, after making his way to Minnis Bay seafront, still wearing only the shorts, the monster was approached by police after they thought that he looked like a suspect they were currently searching for, who had just yesterday been reported for having committed the offence of upskirting his work colleague in a local pub. And, upon further investigation, it was found that this man's name was Harrison Lawrence Van Poos, and that this was indeed the man that they were looking for. And so, they arrested him and took him into custody. As they did so, they ascertained that the dog he had with him was not his dog, and after finding out it was microchipped, they found that the dog had in fact belonged to Claire Knights, whose family had already raised concerns about her whereabouts. Upon contacting the family regarding the whereabouts of the dog, the police immediately expanded their search and began looking for Claire in the location where Harrison, her killer, had been apprehended, with police even searching the site of her murder multiple times, but not realising that the body of Claire lay in the reeds of the dike nearby to where they were searching. After 2 days of searching, and as Claire's family joined the search for their beloved family member, Claire's son made the gruesome discovery of his mother's body in the water, and the harrowing truth of what she had gone through came to light. Immediately, the police turned to Harrison for answers and came up short as he denied responsibility for the murder. But as more of the evidence was revealed, he began to give away details, claiming that he had suffered a mental lapse due to his poor mental health issues, his personality disorder diagnosis, and alcohol consumption, and that he couldn't remember much about the events that took place, but that he was responsible for the killing of Miss Knight. His defence was at first that he was guilty by diminished responsibility due to the above, and that, as I mentioned, he could remember very little of the actual events. He even at one point tried to claim that Claire had made sexual advances towards him, and that this had angered him to the point of violence. But the multiple attempts to figure out a way around his guilt with repeated assessments and changes in story failed, and he was forced to plead guilty to the crime of murder and for the crime of voyeurism after the incident in which he had upskirted the barmaid the day prior to Claire's murder. And on the 28th of February 2025, Harrison Van Poos was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 25 years and 183 days. Following her death, a family statement released by Kent Police said, "Claire was a loving mum, partner, daughter and sister, an amazing contemporary artist, a trailblazer in life. She loved animals, and in particular her Springer Spaniel, Zebulon. We, the family, are struggling to come to terms with the fact she is no longer with us. We wish to thank friends and the community for their active support and kind words. The third area on our list of most dangerous regions today is the West Midlands, comprising Herefordshire, Shropshire, Staffordshire, Warwickshire, West Midlands County and Worcestershire. The West Midlands is renowned for its areas of outstanding natural beauty, with 5 prominent areas being the Wye Valley, Shropshire Hills, Cannock Chase, the Malvern Hills and parts of the Cotswolds. It is also the birth region of William Shakespeare, George Eliot and the beautiful game of rugby. The region also played a pivotal role in the Industrial Revolution, with cities like Birmingham, Wolverhampton and Coventry becoming hubs for manufacturing, especially in areas like ironworking, metalworking and later automobiles. But needless to say, despite its positives, we are here today to discuss its negatives, highlighting instead its darker side, as it takes its place as the third highest murderous region on our list, with 69 murders committed between the date of March 2023 to March 2024. The West Midlands makes up approximately 11.8% of the murders across the UK. Upon further investigation, it is suggested that the reason for such a high murder rate could very well be a number of things, from a high level of poverty and deprivation in the area to high levels of drug-related crimes and knife crimes, with a report that knife crime is on the rise still across the region, with the mainstay of that knife crime coming from the younger generations, driving not only the knife crime higher, but the youth-related violence along with it. And that brings us on to our next case. On the afternoon of Thursday, the 14th of March 2024, 38-year-old Michael O'Bassi spent time helping his mum with her car, something he always did willingly, as helping his family meant everything to him. Later in the evening, Michael decided to go out for a walk around his local area and try and build up his step count in order to beat his dad in their daily step count challenge. After leaving his home, Michael walked in the direction of Perry Hall Park, a park that he and his family had enjoyed many special moments together in, and a place he was intimately familiar with, reaching the park just before 7:30 p.m. At around the same time, a gang of youths comprising of Manuel Filipacci, Ion Morar, Ion Kalin, 2 15-year-old boys and a 14-year-old boy headed towards the park after they had visited the one-stop shopping centre nearby, also reaching the park at around about 7:30 p.m. As Michael strolled through the park, although the exact details are unclear, it is believed that Michael came across the group led by Manuel Filipacci and was immediately set upon by them, with the group looking to inflict as much damage as possible quickly, whilst robbing Michael of his money and possessions. Almost instantly, they began to physically assault Michael, hitting him with a weapon and then punching him until he fell to the floor, where they brutally began kicking and stamping on him as he lay there, unable to defend himself from the onslaught of the attack from the group of 6. Once the men had rendered Michael unconscious, the beating stopped, and the group harvested what they could from his lifeless body, then going on to make the getaway, leaving Michael there alone where he fell, to sadly succumb to his injuries, with CCTV cameras catching them leaving the park at approximately 8:30 p.m. in 2 separate groups. Once out of the park, a group of 4 of them headed back to the one-stop shopping centre they had visited earlier, where CCTV captured Filipacci and Morar using Michael's bank cards to buy drinks, with the pair going on to use the cards they had robbed from him multiple times in total. After leaving the shop, CCTV later captured them again in Normandy Road on the Perry Bar Aston border, reenacting the sickening attack they had just carried out, animatedly acting out the attack in vivid detail as they laughed and joked about the brutal ordeal between one another. Later that evening, after Michael had failed to come home, his family reported him missing, with an investigation being launched. And At 11 AM on March 16th, just 2 days after the attack, Michael O'Bassey's body was found by a dog walker in a quiet part of Perry Hall Park. And upon first discovery, it was thought that Michael had simply collapsed whilst walking in the park, and so his death was not treated as suspicious. However, after a post-mortem was conducted, it was obvious that he had been the victim of a serious assault, and so a murder investigation was launched. The post-mortem concluded that Mr. O'Bassey died from the effects of significant head and facial blunt force injuries, with the distribution of the injuries on his head and face being in keeping with at least 6 forceful blows from a myriad of punches, kicks and stamps. It was also found that he had sustained extensive deep bruising to his head and scalp, as well as bleeding on the brain, with further signs of blunt force injury to his chest and back. There was also found to be the indication that he was hit with a weapon due to the markings on his shoulder, with it also being thought that he had been struck in the genitals at some point throughout the ordeal. In total, he had 100 marks across his body, indicating that this was a sadistic, substantial and sustained attack upon the innocent and defenceless man. After commencing their investigation, the police trawled through CCTV of the surrounding area and quickly identified Manuel Filipacci, Ion Kalin and Ion Marar, alongside the 2 15 and 1 14-year-old boys. And after arresting the gang from addresses in Aston, a picture of the events began to emerge, with the men deciding to plead not guilty and staying quiet about their involvement throughout the investigation, forcing police to work hard to figure out the timeline of events. Upon doing so, however, it was plain to see that the gang was guilty of the murder, and that not only were they guilty of Michael's murder, but also of a further violent robbery assault that had happened at Walsall train station on the 15th of January 2024, when a man was targeted by the group as he walked through the station and was repeatedly punched and kicked by the gang. After a search of the gang's homes, items belonging to Michael were found, including the torch he had had with him that fateful day, with police also finding DNA from 2 of the teenagers on Michael's t-shirt and rucksack. And so, with the stack of DNA evidence coupled with the CCTV of the gang placing them all in the area at and around the time and location of his death, as well as CCTV showing them using Michael's bank cards to make purchases afterwards, their guilt was massively apparent. And on the 25th of February 2025 at Birmingham Crown Court, the gang of 6 were found guilty of the murder and robbery of Michael O'Bassey, as well as Filipacci, Marar and Kalin being found guilty of the attempted robbery of the man at Walsall train station. Throughout the trial, the gang showed no remorse at all, with a sickening display of a complete lack of concern for their victim or his family. After the trial, the family of Michael O'Bassey paid tribute to the devoted father, commenting, "Michael was a beloved partner, dad, son, brother and uncle, who was cherished by everyone who knew him. His beautiful smile and gentle spirit brought warmth and joy to those around him, and his loss is something we struggle with every single day. He was a devoted father who doted on his little boy. They were so close, always laughing and playing together. The gang are yet to be sentenced for their crime." The second most murder-dense area on our list today is the northwest of England, consisting of the counties of Cheshire, Cumbria, Greater Manchester, Lancashire and Merseyside, with a vibrant mix of urban and rural attractions including the iconic Lake District, historic and culture-rich cities like Liverpool and Manchester, and diverse landscapes. It makes it a great place for both nature lovers and culture enthusiasts alike. And as the birth region of icons such as the Beatles and Oasis, actors such as Stephen Graham and Daniel Craig, the talent pool in the area is endless. But as with all of the regions we are visiting today, it also has its issues, one of those being its high violent crime rates. Across the period of March 2023 to March 2024, there were 72 murders committed across the northwest, meaning this region was responsible for approximately 12.3 of the 583 murders committed during that period. Why could this be, I hear you ask? Well, one of many reasons could be that the region suffers from higher than normal levels of deprivation, which is often known to lead to higher rates of violent crime. As well as this, it is also one of the more prominent areas with higher than average percentages of organised crime and gang activity, with two of the big four cities known for high levels of gang-related organised crime being in its catchment area, with those cities being Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham and London. It is also the third most populated region across the UK, with a population of 7,417,397 people across its constituent counties. All in all, these reasons have combined to make the North West the penultimate most murderous region on our list today, which brings us onto our next case. On the morning of March 31st, 2024, a man in Colne, Lancashire, called the police and began ranting that £2,000 had been stolen from his bank account and that he knew for a fact that his housemates were responsible for the theft, as they had been accessing his phone and watching him through his TV. Later that day, on the afternoon of Easter Sunday, emergency services were called to a property in Newmarket Street after report by a member of the public that a man had collapsed outside of a house in the street at approximately 2:30 p.m. Upon their arrival, paramedics found a gruesome scene, with the man known as Richard Chamberlain lying on the ground outside of his house, bleeding to death from multiple stab wounds. Immediately, paramedics jumped into action and, as they began to give Richard treatment, they radioed for police to attend the scene, as they could hear someone inside of the property smashing glass and screaming, "That's what you get for nicking my money." When police arrived, they followed a trail of blood from the location that Richard was found inside of the property and up to the locked door of a room. And upon making their presence known to the person beyond the door, the man shouted back, "Come inside and I'll slice you up." He then asked, "Is he dead?" Upon hearing the threats that the man inside of the room was making, officers called for armed response to attend the scene, and upon their arrival, the man yielded and emerged from the room. As he did so, he was heard saying, "He deserved it, mate. Simple as f***ing taking the p***." Upon his arrest, it was found that the man who had brutally attacked Richard Chamberlain was in fact the man who that very morning had phoned Lancashire police ranting that his neighbours had stolen £2,000 from his bank account and were hacking his phone and watching him through his TV. His name was Frank Rona, a 44-year-old violent thug and ex-convict who had only just been freed from prison 3 weeks earlier, after serving 31 months for attacking his brother with a piece of broken mirror. As police placed him into handcuffs, Frank could not stop talking, reportedly going on to say, "Check my record, man, section 18, I've only been out 3 weeks, know what I mean? Now I'm going back for attempted murder. It is what it is, no one takes the piss out of me." He also added that the other housemate was lucky I had not got him. As Frank was being arrested, the paramedics were working hard to keep Richard alive, moving him into an ambulance and rushing him to hospital, where he underwent emergency chest surgery. But due to the serious nature of the assault that Frank had inflicted upon him, and despite doctors' best efforts, he succumbed to his injuries and was pronounced dead at 3:56 p.m. Upon launching their investigation, police questioned Frank and he pleaded guilty to Richard's murder, with the police finding out that on the fateful day of Frank's evil actions, he had taken powerful prescription medication alongside large amounts of and that he had convinced himself in his drug-fueled state that his housemates had stolen from him and were spying on him, and so he had wanted to confront them and take revenge. The police found that at approximately 1 p.m, Richard had returned back to the home that he house shared with Frank and another man, And as he sat in a chair in his bedroom shortly before 2:30 p.m, Frank had approached him and launched his frenzied and violent attack, repeatedly stabbing Richard in the arms, torso and legs again and again, thrusting the knife in so deep that the depth of some of his wounds were deeper than the blade of the knife itself, with multiple being through and through injuries, meaning the knife had penetrated one side and exited on the other side of the wound. The attack was a brutal and savage assault, with Richard's injuries illustrating that he had attempted to defend himself, but that he had been unable to fight off the onslaught that Frank had inflicted upon him, due to its ferocious and barbaric nature. Once Frank had ended his barrage, Richard, in his weakened and dying state, had the courage and wherewithal to try and find help, and had crawled from his room to the street outside, where he was found by passers-by, who then raised the alarm. But, alas, his injuries were far too severe to survive. During a post-mortem examination, 17 separate stab wounds were found, with multiple of them severing major arteries, giving Richard little to no chance of survival, and ensuring that Frank had managed to get his misplaced revenge for a theft it turned out was a fiction of his demented imagination. It was found during the investigation that Frank Warner had 25 previous convictions for 29 offences, including the incident in which he had attacked his own brother with the shard of broken mirror, and that he had only just been housed in the house share less than 3 weeks prior. It was also found that Richard, who was just 34 years of age, was a vulnerable man who lived with the challenges of autism and was completely innocent of any of the accusations that Frank had made against him, proving that his death was simply the result of a drug-fueled psychosis brought on from Frank not taking his own prescribed antipsychotic medication and instead ingesting several other prescription and recreational drugs in high quantities. After pleading guilty to the murder of Richard, Frank Warner was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years and 79 days. After the trial, Richard's family paid tribute to him, describing him as a loving and caring man who enjoyed art and nature and who dreamed of becoming a fashion designer. And now we come to the last region on the list, the region with the highest number of murders than any other region in the country. The area that has seen more death and violent crime than anywhere else in the UK by a large margin during the 2023 to 2024 fiscal year. And the area that has seen 116 homicides committed inside of its borders. That region is, of course, London, or Greater London as it is commonly known. Consisting of the City of London and its surrounding 32 boroughs, Greater London is number 1 on our list of deadliest regions, being responsible for almost 20% of the murders committed across the UK during the period we have looked at in this video. Famously known as the Global Centre for Finance, Culture and Politics, housing the UK's government, major financial institutions and a vast array of cultural attractions, the London region truly is a place of culture and diversity, celebrated for its ever-increasingly open-minded attitudes and as being a place of historical significance. But there can be no mistaking that the region is plagued by a storm of violent crime and murder, with rates of both being higher here than anywhere else in the country. And, upon digging a little deeper, it is easy to see that the factors that affect the other areas of the country we have looked at today affect this region in exactly the same way, but to a much higher degree here than anywhere else in the UK. Factors such as poverty, deprivation and lack of opportunity affect the younger generations, with it being harder than ever before in this area for most to make ends meet. This can and does drive young men into gang culture through choice and through exploitation, especially in the urban areas. And this of course drives the culture of knife and drug-related crime, with gangs going to war with one another over misplaced hatred and the want to show loyalty to other members of their gangs and protect their turf at all costs, no matter the outcome to themselves or their perceived enemies, it seems. And this brings us on to our final case of the video, that, although is not gang related, is still a heinous display of sickening violence and a massive example of the ultimate betrayal of trust. On January the 1st, 2024, after the kids had left the house, Tia Simmons was handed a drink by her husband, Shane Simmons, who had prepared her the drink and told her it was a health shot. Putting the glass to her lips, she took a sip and her face contorted at the bitter taste on her tongue. Not wanting to seem ungrateful, however, she took a couple more sips, but couldn't bear the taste of the drink any longer, and so put the drink down on the table, telling her husband Shane she was going to go in the shower. She then went upstairs, turned on the shower, got in and let the hot water scatter over her skin, feeling as if it was just another ordinary day. After the shower, Tia got out and walked into her bedroom, and as she did, she began to feel a little dizzy, and so decided to lie down on the bed. Shane, who was 38 years old, and Tia, who was 32, had been married for over 10 years and had settled in Padbury Road, Elysium, South London together, with Shane working as an Uber driver and Tia running a child-minding business. And as far as friends and family were aware, it seemed that things were going well. But Tia had suspected that Shane was cheating on her and using prostitutes, with Tia confiding in a friend just 3 months before her death that she was unhappy and thinking about ending their marriage. Little did she know, Shane had been plotting the end of their relationship himself in a much more gruesome way. As Tia lay on the bed in their bedroom, Shane crept into their room holding a knife that he had taken from downstairs in the kitchen. He had been waiting for the drink that he had given Tia to take effect, because little did she know, the supposed health shot Shane had given her was actually a drink that had 15 sleeping pills crushed up into it, and Shane had given her it as a stage 1 of his devious plot. Once Shane believed the pills had started to work, he walked up to her bedside, leant over her body and began to attack her with furious intent, stabbing her multiple times in the neck, only stopping when he was sure he had done enough damage to kill her. And once Tia had passed, Shane callously carried her body up to the converted attic of their home, covered her in blankets and clothing, and left her there, face down on the floor. After hiding her body at their home, Shane immediately went out and bought new bedding and cleaning products to try and cover up his vile crime. And after doing so, he went and picked up his children and mother-in-law from Bromley, telling them that Tia had gone out with a friend and that she was staying at a hotel. After picking up his family, it is not known where he then took them. But what is known is that on January the 2nd, he lured a teenage girl back to his home and raped her multiple times before, it seems, his conscience began to catch up with him. In the early hours of January the 3rd, Shane entered Lewisham Police Station and confessed all to police officers, telling them he had really effed up this time, admitting to murdering his wife Tia and to the brutal rape of the teenage girl as well. During the police investigation, it was found that Tia and Shane had enjoyed a normal family life, with Tia's mom describing how the family had enjoyed a normal family Christmas with food and games together. But it was later found that Shane had been searching the internet for sleeping pill deaths and for how long a dead body to smell, as early as the month of November previous. It was also found that Simmons had previously worked as a prison officer, but that he had lost his job prior to the COVID lockdowns, claiming he had been stiffed. And he was also found to be in debt due to a gambling problem. But despite this, he gave no real motive for why he felt the need to murder his wife throughout the investigation, instead pinning his hopes on being convicted of manslaughter by diminished responsibility. However, the prosecution would not accept his plea, forcing him to have to go to trial if he was to continue with this reasoning as his defence. And on the day the trial was about to begin, Shane decided to plead guilty to the murder of his wife and the attacks on the teenage girl, with Judge Katz telling the jurors their role was now over and that a life term would be given to Simmons. And on the 17th of October 2024, Shane Simmons was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 32 years, as well as two 12-year sentences to run concurrently with the life term for murder. So there you have it, the top 5 deadliest regions. Do you live in any of these areas, and did you know about any of these murders? Please let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, why not watch the video on screen now, where I begin to uncover the UK's most brutal gangland torture murders. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, when it will once again be time for more true crime.